I'm Marisa Holmes, and I do facilitation and other process-related work in Occupy Wall Street.
What is that facilitation?
Facilitation is guiding people through their own process. It's a horizontal approach to coming to decisions and guiding people through that.
Can you describe the decision-making process within Occupy?
Right now or historically?
Historically and more recent, yeah.
Okay, it's a long trajectory. So, Occupy Wall Street started as the New York City General Assemblies, and the idea was that we would have these gatherings, and that they weren't singular. Like you could have many assemblies. It wasn't like the New York City General Assembly became that later on. But we started meeting down here at the Bull, and then at the Irish Potato Family Memorial, and then in Tompkins Square Park, leading up to September 17th, the first September 17th. And we decided in those meetings that we would have consensus be the form of decision making. So we always tried for consensus, and if we didn't reach consensus, we would drop to a 3/4 majority vote. That was the earliest form. And then on the second day of the occupation, the General Assembly at Zuccotti Park decided that they actually wanted 9/10 to drop to 9/10 majority after trying for consensus. That 3/4 wasn't good enough, and so the 9/10 rule has been what we've used throughout. What we used throughout the occupation, and what we used in the Spokes Council, what we used in the assemblies up until March of 2012. And in March 2012, the facilitation working group backed away from the assemblies and spokes because they were being attacked. They were being verbally and physically attacked, and it didn't seem like there was actually buy-in from the community to keep them going. And so we effectively, we consented in the facilitation working group to go on strike. And then all the other groups that were making the meetings happen, like Tech Ops and Minutes, and everyone just dropped out. So we effectively had a general strike within Occupy Wall Street, where people backed away from our own decision-making structures. And since then, we've been a bit fragmented. I mean, there are many different groups within Occupy Wall Street or under the Occupy umbrella, and there have been some convergence points, like the lead up to May Day. DA had a decision-making process for that used the same consensus, and then 9/10 as a modified version, and that seemed to work pretty well there. It was based around clusters of people who were doing specific tasks leading up to that day of action. But we didn't have anything beyond the day of action for DA. DA kind of fell apart after that. And then throughout the summer, Strike Debt started having assemblies and also using the same process. And now we have Occupy Sandy, and Strike Debt is sort of offshoots of or projects of Occupy Wall Street. And there are many different processes within the two groups. Strike Debt is a lot of the original people who came to Zuccotti Park, and there are more similarities in the principles that we carry through and the processes that we use. Occupy Sandy is becoming a different thing entirely. But essentially Occupy Wall Street has always used consensus, and consensus is a form of decision making that allows people to consent to something rather than agree to something. So rather than having like an up or down vote, you have all of these gray areas, all the complexities of what people actually feel and think about something, and that you have a forum to discuss all of that and reconcile differences before moving forward. So in the end, we have a much more complex decision and course of action, and everyone's heard in the process, which makes it the most sort of democratic forum methodology So yeah, so that's the process. That's mainly when I say process, I mean methodology in the context of what I've talked about. I could also talk a little bit about structure, but yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Wow, that was a lot. But you still have a voting. You do 9/10 of the votes. Is that still consensus then? Could it be still called consensus?
So modified consensus is when you try to reach consensus, and then if you don't reach consensus, like in a large group where you have a variety of different stakeholders and polarized opinion, then you drop to a vote, and it's just a 9/10 vote. So it's not, it's preferable to get consensus, but there's a recognition that, you might not always get consensus, and sometimes you have to move forward. So in a large group, it's helpful to have some kind of modified version. So some people use like consensus -1, consensus -2. Like in a spokes council formation, it's usually better to use the consensus -1, -2, etc., rather than the 9/10 vote or some other voting system, because the constellation of groups might vary. You might have 10 groups, you might have 100 groups, and so it doesn't really make sense to have a voting system. But in in an assembly where people are coming as individuals, it works some of the time. Ideally, yeah.
What is it, all this methodology? What is it based on?
Well, consensus is based in indigenous traditions, mainly in Central and South America, and in the U.S., the Iroquois Confederacy used consensus and spokes council formations. But the way we use consensus today is primarily rooted in the U.S. is primarily rooted in Quaker traditions and in the women's lib movement of the early 70s, and also anti-nuke into the 80s, and by various anarchist currents throughout those movements and up to today.
What's the difference between a General Assembly and a popular assembly?
An assembly is an assembly. There's no difference between a General Assembly and a popular assembly. The term popular assembly is one that's used often in Greece and in Spain, and we started using it here as a way to connote like a space for discussion, but not necessarily to make decisions in, because there's tension around making decisions, and people just wanted a space to come together and to share ideas. And so that was the idea behind like the popular assembly here. But really, it's just, it's a term that could refer to that's how we interpreted it to be. But a popular assembly, a general assembly, they're all assemblies. It doesn't really matter. An assembly is just a large group of people, of individuals, coming together to discuss political ideas, and they may or may not come to decision on things, but that's what an assembly is. And the assemblies that we started were modeled after the Spanish assemblies from 15M. That was specifically like what we were looking to replicate, and they still use assemblies in Spain. They still. They have neighborhood assemblies that are confederated and federated, and they have like thematic assemblies. So if people want to work on like the 14N general strike, then they can go and do that. Or if they want to work on gender issues, they can go and do that. And so there's this sense that like anyone can call an assembly. It's not official. It's not sacrosanct. It's people coming together to come to some kind of idea together.